everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I like to talk about books, and today I'm going to be giving you book recommendations based off of movies that you love. I really like this idea of connecting media and thinking about recommendations based off of just different types of media that you like. So movies and books or music and books. I just really enjoy watching those myself and getting recommendations that way. So I thought it would be fun to just generally talk about popular movies, and if you like those movies, what books you might like to read as well. This is also a way that I typically will guide people when they just come to me asking for book recommendations and they have no idea where to start. I will just ask them like, what kind of movies do you really enjoy watching? Because then you can start finding common themes and figure out what kind of genres they like, and kind of helps steer you to similar books with similar vibes or themes or tropes or anything that you think they might enjoy. So that's what I'm going to do today. Disclaimer, I know stepping into the movie space, making a video on YouTube about movies is different than making a video specifically about books. My expertise is not in movies. I wouldn't even say my expertise is in books. I just read a lot more. I don't know anything about what makes a movie good, cinematic quality. I'm not digging into any of that aspect of things. This is purely like high level. If you liked watching this movie, here's a book that's got similar vibes that I think you would read and enjoy as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The first recommendation I have is one that came really easily to me, and that is the movie Soul. If you enjoyed this Pixar film, then I think you would really like The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So Soul is a movie that is all about finding your spark in life and realizing that that spark doesn't have to be this big, huge thing. It follows this musician who is a teacher, but he really wants to be a famous musician. But over the course of the film, he learns that there are other things to enjoy in life, and it's all about just the meaning of life, what makes life worth living, and it's really heartfelt and really warm in that way. The Midnight Library has a very similar sort of vibe to it, has a very similar storyline. So it follows a main character who is this woman who is just really down about her life. She is really unhappy with the way things have ended up. She wishes things could have gone differently, and she decides to take her own life right at the beginning of the book. And then she goes to this place called the Midnight Library, where there are all these different books, and each book explores a different way her life could have gone had she made a choice differently. So she gets to explore different ways her life could have gone. She gets to go through her list of regrets and see, if I had stayed in that relationship with that guy, how would my life have gone? If I had made it as a famous musician, how would my life had gone? And it's all about that same thing, finding the meaning of life and those things to enjoy. So I think this one is just a really easy one-to-one comparison. They both have those same kind of topics that are brought up. They both gave me the same like warm, fuzzy feelings. And I think if you like one, then you're bound to like the other. The next one is also one that came pretty quickly to me. So if you like films like Parasite or Get Out, then I think you'll really like When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. So Parasite and Get Out both are horror films that do a really nice job of examining real life issues through a dramatic horror genre. They touch on class and race and some really heavy topics, and do so in a way that is horrifying to show the true horrors of those things in reality. When No One Is Watching does a very similar thing. This book covers the topic of gentrification. It follows a character who realizes that her neighborhood is slowly changing as more people leave and different types of people start coming into the neighborhood, and she starts examining the history of her neighborhood and realizes there's some sinister things going on. So I think if you like the way that these movies touch on those really heavy topics and make something that is horrifying, truly horrifying to watch, then I think you'll also like this book because it does a very similar thing. Next up, I have The Age of Adaline. If you liked this movie, then I think you'll definitely like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. It's been a while since I've seen The Age of Adaline, but I still remember how that story made me feel. It just has such a cozy feel to it for some reason, as you're following this woman who is just forgotten through history because she never ages, and the trouble she goes through, and how all she wants is love and acceptance. And also just the overall vibe of it with Blake Lively is just like immaculate. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was very similar. So this follows our main character Addie LaRue, who makes a bargain with the devil in the 1700s to have an immortal life, but the catch that is in that agreement is that no one will ever remember her. So she lives her whole life feeling invisible because she can never make connections with anyone. She can never have a stable living situation. She has to get really creative with how she makes her way through life. And she is really lonely and really struggling with that until one day she meets a boy who remembers her. Honestly, reading this book made me want to watch The Age of Adaline again. So I think they just go together really, really well. They both have that bit of historical vibe to them. They both explore what it's like to go through life with this really unique challenge. And of course, they also both touch on romance. Next up, I have sort of a combined recommendation. So if you liked La La Land or A Star is Born, then I think you will like Daisy Joan and the Six or The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So obviously La La Land and A Star is Born, both of these films are about Hollywood and trying to make it big as a musician and the aspirations of an artist and romance and heartbreak, and are just really, really beautiful films. Daisy Jones and the Six and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo also cover a lot of those same topics. So first, starting with Daisy Jones and the Six, this story follows this band Daisy Jones and the Six that were really popular in the 70s. This is of course all fictional, and it's told in a really interesting like interview format. It feels like you're watching a documentary almost, and everyone knows that the band broke up, but they don't know why. So this story follows the history of this band, the very famous lead singer Daisy Jones and her connections with the rest of the band members, and what happened that broke their group apart. And then The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo follows this woman Evelyn Hugo, who was this Hollywood starlet, and she had 7 husbands in her life and was very infamous for that, and nobody knows who her one true love was. She has now reached the end of her life, and she's prepared to do a full expose interview where she will talk through her entire history and explain what happened and who her one true love was. And so both of these books just have great vibes. They've got that Hollywood feel, the fame, the music and the movies and the love affairs and the love interests and the heartbreak and the glitz and the glam. So I think if you like these movies, these books would be a really nice fit for you as well. Next up, I have a weird one, but trust me on this. If you liked Howl's Moving Castle as an adult, like that is something you watched as an adult that you really enjoyed, then I think you would really like A Court of Thorns and Roses. I know it's weird, but hear me out. So Howl's Moving Castle, if you liked this as an adult for the romance aspect of it, if you really liked watching Sophie get to know Howl and have this mysterious thing going on with him, and he keeps going off, and he's fighting these wars, but you don't really know what he's doing, and he's coming back all depressed and dark and like a bird, and she's trying to figure him out and support him. If you thought that was very gripping, I think you're also gonna like A Court of Thorns and Roses, because as I was reading this book, all I could think about was Howl. So this story is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, except it's set in a fantastical world where there are fairies and mortals. They don't really interact with each other. Mortals are afraid of fairies. They're these like monstrous creatures who used to enslave humans, and mortals just try to stay away from them. But we follow a mortal girl, Feyre, who one day kills a fairy, and so to serve penance, she has to go up to the fairyland and live with this high fae for the rest of her life. And of course, there is romance, but the connection that Tamlin and Feyre have reminded me a lot of Sophie and Howl, and just how Tamlin is going out all the time and dealing with all of these dark things, and he's trying to protect her from it and not let her know about everything that's going on, and she's trying to understand him and help him cope, but she doesn't really know. Like, the relationship those characters have are spot on. So specifically, if that's something you enjoyed in House, I think you will like that aspect of ACOTAR as well. I know it's not a super perfect one-to-one comparison. If you like that movie for other reasons, then maybe just avoid this one. But yeah, I just thought that was a very interesting thing that I saw when I was reading this book. Next up, if you really liked the Sherlock Holmes films with Robert Downey Jr., I have a couple recommendations I could give you, but I would probably just go ahead and steer you to The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This book has such Sherlock vibes. If you really like the modern retelling of Sherlock and the way it's done in that film in particular, not so much the BBC Sherlock, that just has an entirely different vibe. But if you like Sherlock, Robert Downey Jr. style, then I think you're gonna like The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This is a book that is set at the high seas, and it follows this detective and his bodyguard who are going on this ship because the detective is being imprisoned. There may be a devil dark force on the ship, so the detective would be investigating it, but he's imprisoned, so his bodyguard does the investigating. And it is so good, and just has that same sort of modern Sherlock mystery vibe to it, but this one's really fun because you're not following the detective, you're following his like partner in crime who gets to go out and be the detective for the first time. So if you really like the Watson vibe, this is gonna give you the Watson vibe. I would also say like anything Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie I think would be really good for you to read if you like Sherlock in general, those kind of mysteries. Then obviously like going back to those more classics like the Agatha Christie style mysteries I think would also be a good recommendation for you. But I just really love The Devil in the Dark Water for a lot of the same reasons that I like those modern Sherlock retellings, so I think you would too. Next up, I don't have as much explanation for this one, but it makes sense in my head, so maybe it would make sense to you, and that is the movie Midsommar. If you really like this film, I think you would like Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. This is obviously a horror movie that is about this festival. This girl goes there with her boyfriend. There are a lot of weird vibes. There's a lot of taking drugs. There's a lot of just like out in the fields, festival, creepy, weird, confusing hallucination vibes to that story. And then this book follows a girl who goes to live on a farm after a traumatic experience in her past. When she goes to live on this farm with all these other kids, there are ghosts that are there as well, and that's just like well accepted. They all know that. There's weird vibes going on. It feels kind of cultish in a way, but then it ends up telling a really beautiful story. So I think the direction of these are very different, and the stories they're trying to tell are obviously very different, but the aesthetic and the vibes of Midsommar are very similar to the aesthetic and the vibes of Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour, and I can't help but see that every time I think of these two. So yeah, this is a weirder one, but the vibes are on point. Next up, if you like that film Palm Springs that came out on Hulu like last year or something, then I think you would really like Una Out of Order. I will make any excuse to talk about Una Out of Order. It's one of my favorite books ever, and these books aren't exactly the same, but they have very similar themes and vibes to them. So Palm Springs is about this guy and this girl who are at this wedding, and they're stuck in a time loop together, and they don't know why, and they have different mentalities about how they approach it, how they keep hope or lose hope, what they do with the time they have in the time loop and how they consider that, etc. And then Una Out of Order is about this woman who on her 19th birthday wakes up and she's like 34, and she lives her life out of order each year. So she also has a weird thing going on with time, but she's kind of on her own in this situation. Both of these stories just tell an interesting story about how you make the most of your life and time when it is twisted and not presented to you in exactly the right way. This also reminds me of the film Map of Tiny Perfect Things. That is also very similar to Palm Springs, so I could also connect that to this whole universe of weird time things going on. And then I also can't help but think of In a Holidays by Christina Lauren. That is a book that is set around Christmas time, where this girl gets stuck in a time loop, and it's all about this romance and this Christmas vacation. So there's a lot of things in this realm, especially recently, that tackle weird time things going on, time loops, time out of order, and how you make the most of your life when it's that way. And I just gravitate towards those stories a lot, so I have like a whole compendium of recommendations I could give you for that if you're really interested. But I just love these types of stories. I think they're so interesting and such a good way to talk about some of the themes of just life and living and the human experience when time is not the way that we live it today. So if you like those, I think you'll like those. Next up, if you liked the film Heathers, then I think you're really gonna like Bunny by Mona Awad. I actually read Bunny before I ever saw Heathers, and I watched Heathers because I heard it be compared to this book so much, and I think it's so spot on. These have such similar aesthetics and cult feels to them, and they're just weird and dark and comedic. And so if you liked one of them, I think you should definitely check out the other. So Heathers is this film from the 80s that is about this clique of girls in a high school. The main girl leader is Heather. There's another girl, Veronica, who's like part of the friend group but also kind of despises the friend group, and then she ends up with this guy, and they like accidentally kill Heather, sort of, but then they try to make it look like she killed killed herself, and then it just spirals from there out of control. Bunny is about this group of girls who are in a clique in this MFA program. They call each other Bunny, and there is this girl, our main character, who is like, she doesn't like them, but then she ends up getting associated with their group, and then things spiral out of control and weird stuff starts happening in that book as well. So both just have this like nightmarish quality about them, like this fever dream quality about them, where you have no idea where the story is going to go next, and they're just both so dark but also comedic and weird. So these aesthetics match up perfectly. If you like one, check out the other because you're sure to like that one too. Another general recommendation I have is if you like classic horror movies, I think you would like Riley Sager's books. Riley Sager's books are all pretty much directly inspired by a classic horror movie. You've got Rosemary's Baby, you've got Haunted Houses, you've got Summer Camps, you've got like all of those classic horror tropes and those movies that you can see are very clearly inspiring his books. So if you like those vibes and you want to see similar stories be told in a modern lens, then I think these books are good comparisons to some of these classic horror movies. And then finally, if you like the movie Dark Shadows, I think you should read What Big Teeth by Rose Zabot. I just recently read this book. It is one of my favorite books that I've read. It is so weird. Dark Shadows gives me like Addams Family vibes too, and this book also gives me Addams Family vibes. So if you like these like weird monster family, dark, fever dream feeling stories where you don't really know what's happening, everything's kind of funny and weird romance also in both of these, like it's just like a whole vibe and a whole aesthetic. Dark Shadows and What Big Teeth just go together in my head and make sense. So if you like one, check out the other. And that is it for all of my recommendations. Like I said, I'm not an expert on movies. I just have seen similar vibes and aesthetics and feelings that these movies and books have given me. So don't come after me if you don't like my recommendations, just take it or leave it. But I thought this was fun. I thought it was a fun way to start on the whole concept of inspiring book recommendations based off of other types of media. I'd definitely like to do more of these in the future, maybe with music or maybe going specific genre recommendations for movies and books. So if there's any that come to your mind that you would like to see as well, let me know. And also let me know if you have any further recommendations based off of the movies I selected and the books that I matched them with, any similar themes or tropes or vibes or storylines. Leave them in the comments below because these are some of my favorite movies and favorite books, so I would love to see more that is out there in the realm of all the things these stories talk about. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!